In the summer of 1863, the United States was a nation divided. 2 years of relentless conflict had left towns scarred, farms abandoned, and families torn apart. The war had stretched across the southern states, into Maryland, and now, unexpectedly, into Pennsylvania. Into this tense and uncertain landscape marched two massive armies, each carrying its own hopes, fears, and convictions. One army would advance northward under the command of General Robert E. Lee, confident from previous victories. The other, led by General George G. Meade, would position itself to defend not only the territory but the very principles of the Union. The town of Gettysburg, small and unremarkable, would become the stage for a battle that neither side had fully anticipated. The first encounters were almost accidental, as scouting parties collided in the fields and woods around the town. What began as reconnaissance quickly escalated into full engagement. Soldiers, many of them young and untested, found themselves amidst a chaos beyond anything they could have imagined. The landscape itself became a character in the unfolding drama. Rolling hills, open fields, and scattered farmhouses offering both obstacles and fragile shelter. As the first day progressed, the fighting intensified. Union forces, initially surprised by the Confederate advance, gradually withdrew towards stronger positions on the high ground south of Gettysburg. Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and Culp's Hill became focal points for defensive strategy. The Confederate forces, pressing their advantage, pushed forward, but the terrain slowed their progress. By evening, both armies were exhausted, yet neither had secured a decisive victory. The fields were littered with the remnants of battle, broken fences, abandoned equipment, and the eerie silence that follows intense combat. The day's events are defined not only by strategy and orders, but by the courage of individual soldiers. Young men confronted fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, performing acts of endurance that would remain anonymous yet crucial to the unfolding battle. The leaders, from generals to officers, weighed every decision carefully, knowing that a single miscalculation could alter the course of the conflict. By sunset, the first day had concluded with the Union Army holding the high ground, a position of strategic advantage that would prove critical in the days to come. Both sides faced the reality that the next day would demand more of them than they could yet comprehend. The first day at Gettysburg set the stage for the greater struggle to follow. It was a day of cautious advances, defensive maneuvers, and the testing of resolve. The soldiers slept, not knowing what the next day would bring, but the anticipation of further combat hung over the hills and fields, marking Gettysburg as a place where history itself was beginning to be written. The morning of July 2nd, 1863, dawned over Gettysburg with an uneasy calm, as if the earth itself held its breath. Both armies faced the challenge of a new day, aware that the previous day had been merely a prelude. The Union forces occupied the high ground south of the town, forming a defensive line that stretched from Cemetery Hill to Culp's Hill, and including the crucial position of Little Round Top at the far left. The Confederates, emboldened by their initial successes, prepared for a series of coordinated attacks designed to break the Union lines before reinforcements could strengthen them. The day began with positioning and reconnaissance. Officers examined terrain, mapped potential avenues of attack, and attempted to predict the enemy's movements. Soldiers labored to fortify their positions, constructing makeshift defenses using fences, stones, and the natural features of the hills. The air was thick with anticipation, and the quiet was deceptive, a temporary lull before a storm that would sweep across the landscape. By mid-morning, the first major clashes erupted. The Confederates launched attacks on both Union flanks, seeking to dislodge the defenders and gain the advantage of the high ground. On the Union left, Little Round Top became the scene of extraordinary tension. The rocky hill, seemingly minor in elevation, held immense strategic significance. Its control would allow artillery to dominate the Union line and provide a launching point for further assaults. Union soldiers, many of them inexperienced volunteers, were ordered to hold the hill at all costs. Officers worked tirelessly to organize the defense, understanding that failure could compromise the entire line. The battle unfolded in waves. The Confederate attacks were fierce, relentless, and at times coordinated with a precision born of discipline and desperation. Union soldiers responded with determination, holding their positions despite the overwhelming pressure. The fighting was intense, marked by the struggle to occupy advantageous terrain, the courage of individuals standing firm under fire, and the repeated testing of both sides' endurance. At Devil's Den and the wheat field, the combat was chaotic, with units becoming fragmented as they engaged in localized contests for control. The terrain, with its rocks, trees, and depressions, turned each encounter into a small battle within the larger conflict. As the day progressed, both sides suffered heavy losses. Soldiers became exhausted, equipment was damaged, and the ground itself was scarred by artillery and musket fire. Yet, the Union lines held, largely due to the timely arrival of reinforcements and the steadfastness of those occupying critical positions. The leadership of the Union commanders, combined with the discipline and resolve of their troops, prevented the Confederate forces from achieving a breakthrough that could have ended the battle in a single day. By evening, the fighting had largely subsided, though sporadic skirmishes continued across the fields. Both armies took stock of their positions, tending to the wounded and reinforcing their lines. The second day of Gettysburg had proven even bloodier than the first, and the outcome remained uncertain. Each side knew that the following day would likely decide the fate of the campaign. Soldiers, weary and bruised, rested where they could, while commanders planned the next moves, understanding that Gettysburg had become more than a battlefield. It was now the crucible in which the future of the nation might be tested. As night fell, a sense of grim anticipation settled over the hills. The Union Army remained on the defensive, clinging to the high ground. The Confederate Army, having failed to break the line, prepared for one final, decisive effort. The stage was set for the third day, when strategy, courage, and determination would converge in a moment that history would never forget. The morning of July 3rd, 1863, broke over Gettysburg with a tension so palpable it seemed the air itself had thickened. Both armies were exhausted. The first 2 days of combat had left the field scarred, the hills churned, and thousands of men wounded or dead. Yet there was no reprieve, no pause, for leaders on both sides knew that this day could determine the fate of the campaign, and perhaps the war itself. General Robert E. Lee, confident in the skill and courage of his army, decided on a bold and daring plan. A concentrated assault on the center of the Union line, held along Cemetery Ridge. The strategy aimed to pierce the Union defenses, shatter their cohesion, and force a decisive victory on Northern soil. The risks were immense. The Union forces occupied well-fortified positions, with artillery ready to unleash devastating fire on any approaching troops. Nevertheless, Lee resolved to press the attack, believing that the morale and momentum of his army demanded it. The Confederate forces prepared meticulously. Artillery batteries opened the day with a massive bombardment intended to weaken the Union defenses and soften the troops for the coming infantry assault. For hours, cannon fire shook the hills and valleys, leaving craters in the fields and filling the air with smoke and the ringing echo of metal on earth. The Union soldiers, disciplined and vigilant, held their positions, enduring the pounding with a mix of anxiety and resolve. Officers moved among the ranks, ensuring that lines remained intact and morale sustained. By early afternoon, the moment for the infantry assault had arrived. Thousands of Confederate soldiers advanced across nearly a mile of open ground, exposed to the full brunt of Union artillery and rifle fire. The sight of lines moving steadily, despite the deadly barrage, created a surreal tableau of courage, determination, and human cost. The charge, later immortalized as Pickett's Charge, became the defining moment of the battle. The soldiers faced obstacles that seemed insurmountable: open fields, entrenched defenders, and the knowledge that any step forward could be their last. The Union forces responded with discipline and intensity. Cannons roared, rifles cracked, and the defenders held their ground with a determination born of both fear and necessity. The attacking forces reached the Union lines in isolated pockets, only to be repelled through fierce resistance. The impact was catastrophic for the Confederates. Losses mounted at an alarming rate, and despite moments of bravery and small successes in localized areas, the assault failed to break the Union center. As the day wore on, it became clear that the Confederate Army could not achieve its objective. General Lee, recognizing the failure of the assault and the staggering losses sustained, ordered a withdrawal. The retreat was conducted under the shadow of Union artillery, marking the end of the offensive at Gettysburg. The Union Army, though battered and exhausted, had held its ground. Cemetery Ridge remained firmly in their control, the high ground proving once again its decisive value. The third day of battle left Gettysburg marked in blood, courage, and sacrifice. Over 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing across the 3 days of fighting. The town and surrounding countryside bore the physical scars of conflict, while the human toll was felt in families, regiments, and communities across the nation. The failure of the Confederate assault signaled a turning point in the Civil War, halting Lee's advance into Northern Territory and giving the Union forces a strategic advantage they would never relinquish. As night fell on July 3rd, the armies tended their wounded, buried the dead, and prepared for what came next. Gettysburg was no longer just a town in Pennsylvania. It had become a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and the fragile promise of a nation divided but not defeated. The battle had ended, but its consequences would ripple across the remainder of the war, shaping strategy, morale, and the very course of history. On the morning of July 4th, 1863, Gettysburg was quiet in a way that was almost unnatural. The roar of cannon and musket fire had ceased, but the silence was heavy with the weight of loss. The fields that had been the scene of such intense struggle now bore the physical reminders of battle. The churned earth of artillery fire, abandoned weapons, and makeshift shelters hastily constructed during the fighting. The human cost was staggering. Tens of thousands of soldiers lay wounded or dead, their lives forever entwined with the history of the town and the nation itself. The Confederate Army, recognizing the futility of further engagement, began a careful withdrawal back to Virginia. General Robert E. Lee led his army with measured caution, knowing that any disorder during the retreat could invite disaster. Despite the losses, Lee's army maintained its cohesion, preserving the core of the force for the campaigns yet to come. The retreat marked the end of the Confederate attempt to bring the war into Northern Territory, a campaign that had promised bold victory but delivered devastating defeat. For the Union Army, Gettysburg was a bitter yet meaningful victory. General George G. Meade and his officers worked tirelessly to consolidate their positions, care for the wounded, and restore order. The victory was more than strategic, it was moral. The Union had repelled a major invasion, held critical terrain, and demonstrated resilience in the face of relentless assaults. Soldiers and officers alike understood that the battle had tested them to the limit, and that their endurance had shaped the course of the war. The people of Gettysburg, whose town had become a battlefield overnight, began the somber task of recovery. Homes, barns, and fields had been damaged or destroyed. Civilians cared for the injured, assisted in burials, and attempted to restore a semblance of normal life amidst the wreckage. Their experiences became part of the story of Gettysburg, a reminder that war extends beyond soldiers to affect entire communities. Months later, in November 1863, President Abraham Lincoln returned to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery for the fallen soldiers. Standing before the assembled crowd, Lincoln delivered a brief but powerful address that captured the essence of the battle and its significance. He reminded the nation that the sacrifices at Gettysburg were not in vain, and that the war was a test of whether a nation conceived in liberty could endure. His words transformed the site from a battlefield into a symbol of unity, sacrifice, and the enduring principles upon which the United States was founded. Gettysburg became more than a military engagement. It became a touchstone in American history. It demonstrated the bravery of ordinary soldiers, the weight of leadership, and the human cost of conflict. It marked a turning point in the Civil War, giving the Union forces momentum and confidence while compelling the Confederates to reassess their strategy. It also left an enduring legacy in the nation's consciousness, reminding generations that freedom, unity, and courage are defended not by a single day of battle, but by sustained commitment and sacrifice. In the years that followed, historians, writers, and citizens would look back on Gettysburg as a defining moment. It was a place where decisions shaped destinies, where ordinary people confronted extraordinary circumstances, and where the future of a divided nation hung in the balance. The story of Gettysburg is a testament to endurance, leadership, and the resolve of individuals and armies alike. Its memory continues to resonate, reminding all who study it that the cost of liberty is high, but the reward, a nation preserved, is priceless.